What if 3 months could define your entire existence, turn you into the most searched name on the planet, and leave you fighting for your identity for the rest of your life? Would you survive it, or would it destroy you? Welcome to Star's Tale, where we dive deep into the lives that shaped our culture, the stories that haunted our screens, and the human beings behind the headlines who dared to rise, fall, and rise again. Today, we're unraveling the complex, controversial, and ultimately redemptive journey of a woman who became a global phenomenon almost overnight, faced death threats from terrorist organizations, was disowned by her own family, earned barely enough to pay rent despite being the most watched person in her industry, and then spent years clawing her way back to reclaim her narrative, her dignity, and her future. This is the story of Mia Khalifa, and trust me, nothing about it is what you think. Born Sarah Jo Shamoun on February 10, 1993 in the vibrant yet turbulent city of Beirut, Lebanon, Mia entered a world already scarred by conflict, where the echoes of civil war still lingered in the streets and the shadow of political instability hung over every family's dinner table, and for the first 8 years of her life, she lived in this beautiful chaos, attending a private French school where she learned multiple languages and absorbed the rich tapestry of Middle Eastern culture that would later become both a source of pride and a target for international criticism. Her childhood in Beirut was marked by strict Catholic upbringing in a conservative household where modesty was not just encouraged but demanded, where the weight of cultural expectations pressed down on her young shoulders, and where the concept of female autonomy was something whispered about but never truly practiced. And she remembers those early years with a mixture of nostalgia and pain. The beautiful Lebanese sunsets over the Mediterranean, the smell of za'atar and fresh bread from street vendors, the sound of Arabic prayers echoing through neighborhoods, and the constant underlying tension that war could erupt again at any moment, that safety was never guaranteed, that tomorrow might bring devastation. But in 2001, when Mia was just 8 years old, everything changed when her family made the heart-wrenching decision to leave Lebanon and immigrate to the United States, seeking stability and opportunity in a country that promised freedom but would ultimately make her feel more trapped than she ever felt in war-torn Beirut. The family settled in Montgomery County, Maryland, and for young Mia, the culture shock was devastating. She arrived in America just months after the September 11 attacks, at a time when being Arab, being Muslim-looking, being from the Middle East made you a target for suspicion, hatred, and violence. And even though her family was Catholic, her classmates didn't care about those distinctions. They only saw her brown skin, her Arabic name, her foreign accent, and they made her life a living hell. The bullying was relentless and cruel, kids calling her terrorist, mocking her heritage, excluding her from social groups, making her feel like an outsider in every possible way, and Mia internalized this rejection so deeply that she began to hate herself, to wish she could shed her Lebanese identity like an uncomfortable skin, to desperately want to be white, to be American, to be anything other than what she was. She struggled with English initially, feeling stupid and inadequate when she couldn't express herself as fluently as her peers, and the feeling of not belonging, of being fundamentally different and unacceptable, planted seeds of insecurity that would influence every major decision she made in the coming years. Despite these challenges, Mia was academically gifted and determined to prove herself. She attended Northwest High School where she threw herself into her studies as an escape from her social isolation, finding solace in books and history, developing a sharp intellect that would later help her navigate the complex media landscape she'd find herself trapped in. During her teenage years, she was overweight by conventional standards, which only added another layer to her feelings of inadequacy and undesirability, and she watched from the sidelines as other girls dated, attended parties, and lived the carefree American teenage experience she desperately wanted but couldn't access. And these formative experiences of rejection, bullying, and alienation created a void inside her, a hunger for validation and acceptance that would later make her vulnerable to exploitation. After graduating high school, Mia enrolled at the University of Texas at El Paso, choosing to major in history because she was fascinated by how past events shaped present realities, how power structures evolved, how marginalized voices got erased from official narratives. And during her college years, something shifted. She underwent a physical transformation, losing weight, getting breast implants to address her deep-seated body image issues, and suddenly experiencing male attention for the first time in her life. And she didn't know how to process this new reality, going from invisible to hypervisible almost overnight, from being rejected to being desired. And in her own words, she went from being involuntarily celibate to hypersexual, chasing validation through male attention because she had no other framework for understanding her own worth. She worked part-time jobs to support herself through college, including a stint at Whataburger in Miami, Florida, flipping burgers and serving customers while dreaming of something more, something that would make her feel special, important, seen, And little did she know that a random encounter on a Miami street would change her life forever and set in motion a series of events that would simultaneously make her famous and destroy everything she thought she wanted. It was October 2014, and Mia was 21 years old, recently graduated with her bachelor's degree in history, working dead-end jobs and trying to figure out what to do with her life, when a man stopped her on the street and asked if she'd be interested in nude modeling. She recalls thinking about the offer for 2 weeks, weighing the pros and cons, feeling the pull of curiosity and the promise of quick money and attention, and she was in a relationship at the time with a man who encouraged her to do it, who saw dollar signs and opportunity rather than danger and exploitation, and finally, she said yes, walking into that first shoot with a mixture of excitement and trepidation, having no idea that she was signing up for something that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Her stage name came from combining her dog's name, Mia, with rapper Wiz Khalifa's last name, a seemingly innocuous decision that would become her permanent identity in the eyes of millions, and within weeks of entering the industry in October 2014, she was thrust into the spotlight in the most explosive way possible when Bang Bros, the company she was working with, proposed a scene that would wear a hijab during a threesome, and Mia remembers the moment they presented the script to her, the moment she looked at the wardrobe and said to the producers, "You are going to get me killed," knowing instinctively that this crossed a line, that this would spark outrage, that this was different from anything else she'd done. But at 21, working in an industry where saying no felt impossible, where she was told what to wear and how to perform, where the power dynamic was completely skewed in favor of the producers who saw her as a commodity rather than a human being, she went through with it, and the scene was released in December 2014, and within hours, Mia's life exploded in ways she never could have imagined. The backlash was immediate, intense, and terrifying. The hijab scene went viral across the Middle East, particularly in Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan, where Muslims saw it as a deliberate insult to their faith, a desecration of a sacred religious symbol, and within a week, Mia was being targeted by extremist groups, receiving death threats that weren't vague or empty but specific and chilling. ISIS, the terrorist organization that was at the height of its power in 2014, photoshopped her face onto images of beheadings, creating mock execution videos where her head was placed on a victim's body with captions threatening that this would be her fate, and they posted a Google Street View screenshot of her apartment with death threats attached, letting her know they knew where she lived, that she wasn't safe, that they were coming for her. Her Instagram account, which had rapidly grown to over 2 million followers, was hacked by ISIS sympathizers and taken down, and her social media was flooded with messages calling her a disgrace to Islam, a traitor to her heritage, telling her she would burn in hell, that her head would be cut soon, and the Lebanese government and media condemned her publicly, with some claiming she had brought shame to the entire nation, and most devastatingly, her own parents disowned her, cutting off contact and publicly distancing themselves from their daughter, unable to reconcile their conservative values with what she had done. And Mia found herself completely alone, the most searched person on Pornhub but also the most hated woman in the Middle East, making global headlines not for any achievement or talent but for a single controversial decision that she had tried to warn the producers would be dangerous. At the peak of the controversy, Mia was voted the #1 performer on Pornhub in December 2014, just 2 months after entering the industry, and X-Hamster reported that she was the most searched adult actress of 2016, with millions of views and searches that translated into massive profits for the companies that owned her content. But here's the devastating truth that most people don't know: despite becoming arguably the most famous adult performer in the world, despite her videos being watched hundreds of millions of times, despite the companies making millions off her image and content, Mia herself earned approximately $12,000 during her entire 3-month career in the industry, barely enough to cover her rent and medical expenses, not nearly enough to justify the permanent damage to her reputation, the death threats, the family estrangement, the psychological trauma. She has been vocal about how the industry exploited her, how she was given unfavorable contracts that paid her a flat fee with no residuals or royalties, how the producers knew exactly what they were doing when they put her in that hijab, knowing it would generate controversy and clicks and money for them while she bore all the consequences. And Bang Bros later disputed her claims about earnings, saying they paid her over $178,000, but even if that higher figure is accurate, it's still a fraction of the millions the companies made from her content, and it doesn't account for the decade-plus of content ownership they retained, continuing to profit from her image long after she left the industry while she received nothing. By January 2015, just 3 months after entering the adult industry, Mia walked away, realizing too late that she had made a catastrophic mistake, that the brief moment of feeling desired and special and important had cost her everything: her family, her safety, her privacy, her future career prospects, her sense of self, and she tried desperately to return to normal life, working as a paralegal and bookkeeper in Miami, hoping that anonymity was possible, that people would forget, that she could somehow escape the shadow of those 3 months. But the internet is forever, and search engines don't forget, and everywhere she went, she was recognized, stared at, judged, and she was living in what she describes as a disgusting, cockroach-infested efficiency apartment, broke despite being famous, isolated because she had no friends or family to turn to, stuck in a toxic relationship with the man who had encouraged her to enter the industry in the first place, and by mid-2015, she was in the darkest period of her life, barely able to get out of bed, suffering from severe depression and anxiety, feeling like a prisoner in her own body, haunted by those 12 videos that were now defining her entire existence. She tried therapy, started medication, and slowly began to realize that running from her past was impossible, that the internet had permanently branded her, and that her only option was to somehow take control of the narrative and rebuild her life on her own terms. The turning point came when Mia made a crucial decision. If she couldn't escape her internet fame, she would leverage it differently, transforming from an exploited performer into a social media personality with agency over her own content and image. She began building her presence on Instagram, Twitter, and later TikTok, posting about her love of sports, particularly Washington, D.C. teams like the Capitals and the Redskins, sharing her opinions on games and players with the kind of passionate, knowledgeable commentary that surprised people who had written her off as just a former adult actress with nothing to offer. And she discovered that sports content, combined with her natural wit and willingness to be vulnerable about her past, resonated with millions of people. Her follower count exploded, reaching tens of millions across platforms, and with that audience came opportunities that actually paid well, brand sponsorships from major companies that earned her hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, much more than she ever made in adult films, and suddenly she had financial stability and the power to choose which opportunities to accept or decline. In 2017, Mia landed her first major mainstream gig co-hosting Out of Bounds, a daily sports talk show on Complex News with former NBA player Gilbert Arenas, and though the show only ran until February 2018, it proved that she could be more than her past, that she had legitimate knowledge and charisma that worked in traditional media formats. She followed this with Sportsball alongside Tyler co-starting in July 2018, positioning herself as a serious sports commentator who happened to have a controversial background rather than a controversial figure trying to do sports commentary. And while these shows were relatively short-lived, they established her credibility in a male-dominated field and showed her willingness to put in the work to be taken seriously. She also began streaming on Twitch, particularly co-streaming NBA G League games where she brought her authentic, humorous commentary style to basketball, averaging 100,000 views per broadcast and attracting people who weren't even basketball fans but just enjoyed her personality and banter. And she launched a YouTube channel, started selling merchandise and exclusive content on Patreon, and basically built a diversified income stream that finally gave her the financial independence she had been seeking all along. But Mia wasn't content with just being an influencer. She wanted to reclaim her narrative more actively, to address the exploitation she experienced, and to advocate for others trapped in similar situations. In 2020, she became increasingly vocal about the adult industry's predatory practices, posting TikTok videos and giving interviews where she detailed how she was manipulated, how contracts were designed to benefit companies at performers' expense, how young women were lured in with promises that bore no resemblance to the reality they'd face, and she started a petition demanding that adult websites remove her content, arguing that she should have control over her own image and that companies shouldn't profit indefinitely from work she did as a confused 21-year-old. And this petition gained over 1.6 million signatures, generating international media attention and forcing conversations about consent, digital rights, and the permanence of online content. She also began speaking openly about her mental health struggles, the depression and anxiety that plagued her for years, the therapy and medication that helped her survive, the dark thoughts that haunted her in those early years after leaving the industry. And by being vulnerable and honest about her pain, she connected with millions of people who saw themselves in her story, who understood what it meant to make mistakes and be judged forever, who appreciated her refusal to be ashamed when shame was the primary weapon used against her. Around the same time, Mia made another pivotal decision that would prove controversial but ultimately empowering. She joined OnlyFans in 2020, and critics immediately pounced, accusing her of hypocrisy for condemning the adult industry while creating subscription-based content. But Mia had a nuanced response that highlighted why OnlyFans represented something fundamentally different for her. On OnlyFans, she had complete control over what she posted, when she posted it, how it was marketed, and who profited from it. She wasn't creating explicit content but rather lifestyle content, behind-the-scenes glimpses, personal messages, and yes, provocative but non-nude content that gave subscribers access to her personality and daily life, and most importantly, she kept the majority of the revenue instead of receiving a tiny fraction while companies made millions. And this distinction mattered deeply to her because it was about agency, about consent, about the difference between being exploited and being empowered. And her OnlyFans became wildly successful, reportedly earning her millions of dollars, making her one of the platform's top creators and finally giving her the financial security that had eluded her for so long. She also began monetizing through Cameo, where fans could pay for personalized video messages, and through sponsored posts on Instagram where her 26 million followers made her incredibly valuable to brands. And suddenly, Mia Khalifa was no longer defined solely by 3 months of mistakes but by nearly a decade of strategic reinvention, business acumen, and authentic connection with her audience. But Mia's journey wasn't just about financial success. She was also becoming a powerful voice in spaces where Middle Eastern women were rarely heard, using her platform to speak about political issues, human rights violations, and social justice causes that mattered to her. She was outspoken about the Lebanese government corruption that led to the devastating Beirut explosion in August 2020, using her massive platform to raise awareness and funds for victims, auctioning off her infamous glasses to raise money for the Lebanese Red Cross, and reminding the world that despite her complicated relationship with her home country, she still cared deeply about its people. She also spoke out about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, criticizing U.S. military aid to Israel and expressing solidarity with Palestinian civilians, statements that cost her professional relationships, including Playboy ending their podcast deal with her in 2023, but she refused to be silent on issues she felt were morally imperative. Even when speaking up meant losing money and opportunities, she advocated for sex workers' rights, arguing that people who choose this work deserve dignity, safety, legal protection, and control over their own content. And she called out the hypocrisy of a society that consumes adult content voraciously while condemning the people who create it, pointing out that the shame should fall on exploitative companies and hypocritical consumers rather than on performers themselves. She also became an advocate for mental health awareness, sharing her own struggles with depression and anxiety, discussing her therapy journey, and encouraging others to seek help without shame. And through all of this activism, she was redefining what it meant to be Mia Khalifa, showing that a person could have a complicated past and still be a force for positive change, that mistakes don't have to define you forever if you're willing to learn, grow, and fight for something bigger than yourself. In 2023, Mia made her most ambitious entrepreneurial move yet by launching Shaitan, a jewelry and lifestyle brand created in partnership with designer Sarah Byrne, who had previously worked with Kanye West's Yeezy and other high-profile fashion brands. The name Shaitan, meaning devil in Arabic, was a deliberate choice that embraced her controversial reputation while reclaiming her Lebanese heritage. And the brand offered body jewelry, necklaces, waist chains, anklets, and eventually swimwear and lingerie, all designed to celebrate self-expression, sensuality, and the kind of confident femininity that doesn't apologize for existing. Mia was deeply involved in the creative process, and the brand reflected her personal aesthetic, mixing Middle Eastern cultural influences with modern, edgy design, and priced accessibly between $80 and $600, making it available to her fan base rather than just luxury consumers. Shaitan's launch was met with both enthusiasm from her supporters and predictable backlash from critics who questioned why anyone would buy jewelry from someone with her background. But Mia didn't care about the haters anymore because she had learned that no matter what she did, there would always be people who refused to see her as anything other than those 3 months in 2014, and Shaitan represented something deeply personal to her, a tangible business that she could build and pass on, something that proved she was a functioning member of society with skills and vision beyond her internet notoriety. The brand's most affordable pieces sold out within 24 hours of launch, and Shaitan quickly expanded beyond jewelry, collaborating with streetwear brand Aries for a co-designed collection and branching into swimwear in September 2024 with chrome bikinis that embodied Mia's philosophy that a cool girl's summer never ends. And through Shaitan, Mia was proving that she could be a serious fashion player, not just a celebrity slapping her name on products but an actual creative force with a clear vision and business acumen. Mia's entry into the fashion world extended beyond her own brand. She became a legitimate fashion fixture, walking her first runway show for KNWLS in September 2023, attending Paris Fashion Week where she sat front row at Louis Vuitton, Blue Marble, and other prestigious shows, and starring in campaigns for Marc Jacobs' Gen Z-focused Heaven line, Aries Fall/Winter 2023 collection, and Shoreditch Ski Club's swimwear line. Fashion industry insiders like Sophia Prantera, founder of Aries, praised her as a muse with a punk attitude and authentic resilience, seeing past the headlines to recognize a woman who had fought through adversity and emerged with a distinctive personal style and unshakable confidence. Influencer marketing data showed that Mia generated $7.8 million in earned media value for brands during the autumn/winter 2023 season, outperforming celebrities like Kylie Jenner and Zendaya in terms of social media conversation and engagement around the brands she wore, proving that controversial figures could be fashion assets if they had authentic style and a devoted audience. And Mia reveled in these Fashion Week moments, posting backstage content of her getting fitted, fangirling over seamstresses and designers, showing genuine excitement and gratitude for opportunities that many people thought she'd never receive. And through fashion, she was reclaiming space in an industry that often judges women harshly, while simultaneously using Mia's ability to generate buzz and publicity. Throughout all these professional successes, Mia's personal life remained complicated and often painful. She had married her high school boyfriend in February 2011, but that marriage crumbled in 2014 around the same time she entered the adult industry, officially ending in divorce in 2016, and the dissolution of that relationship, which had been her connection to her pre-fame identity, left her adrift and searching for stability. In 2019, she married Swedish chef Robert Sandberg in what seemed like a fairy tale romance, complete with a creative proposal where he hid the engagement ring in a bowl of food at a fancy Chicago restaurant. And for a while, it looked like Mia had found the partnership and normalcy she craved with someone who had his own successful career and wasn't threatened by her past. But the relationship couldn't withstand the pressures of her public persona, the constant scrutiny, and whatever private issues they faced, and they separated in July 2020 and eventually divorced, releasing a mature joint statement that acknowledged they had tried therapy and everything possible to make it work, but sometimes love isn't enough. She then dated Puerto Rican rapper and singer Jaco from 2021 to 2022, a relationship that played out partly in public but ultimately ended like the others. And through all these romantic failures, Mia was learning painful lessons about how her past affected her present, how potential partners either fetishized her former career or couldn't get past it, how difficult it was to find genuine connection when everyone thought they already knew everything about her based on 12 videos from a decade ago, and the loneliness of being famous but unable to trust people's motivations for getting close to her weighed heavily on her mental health and her ability to envision a stable, happy future. As Mia moved through her late 20s and into her early 30s, she also faced ongoing legal battles and conflicts with the companies that still owned her content. Bang Bros and other adult companies continued to profit from her videos, re-releasing old footage, attacking her publicly when she spoke out against them, and fighting her attempts to have content removed from their sites, arguing that she had signed contracts giving them perpetual rights and that her current regrets didn't override those agreements. And while legally they had a point, Mia argued that a 21-year-old who was manipulated and pressured couldn't give truly informed consent, that the power imbalance made those contracts inherently unfair, and that the permanent nature of internet content meant that people should have some ability to remove youthful mistakes from public view, especially when they were being weaponized against her in every aspect of her life. She filed copyright claims, spoke to lawyers, and made her case in the court of public opinion. And while she didn't succeed in getting all her content removed, she did spark important conversations about digital rights, the ethics of profiting from someone's past indefinitely, and whether the internet's permanent memory serves justice or cruelty. She also dealt with recurring incidents of her images being used without permission, deepfakes being created, and her likeness being exploited in ways she couldn't control, constant reminders that once you put something on the internet, you lose all ownership of your image and identity in ways that men in the industry rarely experience to the same degree. Despite all these challenges, by 2025, Mia Khalifa had built something remarkable, an estimated net worth between $6 and $8 million, primarily from OnlyFans, social media sponsorships, brand deals, and her Shaitan business, far exceeding what she could have ever earned in the adult industry and proving that her real value wasn't her body but her personality, business acumen, and ability to connect with millions of people across multiple platforms. She owns real estate including a reported $4 million home, drives luxury cars, travels extensively, and lives the kind of comfortable, stylish life she dreamed about as that lonely, bullied immigrant kid in Maryland who felt like she'd never belong anywhere. She has over 26 million followers on Instagram, 38 million on TikTok, 6 million on Twitter, and nearly 1 million YouTube subscribers, making her one of the most influential media personalities of her generation regardless of How that influence began, and brands continue to pay her anywhere from $20,000 to $50,000 for a single Instagram post because they know her audience is engaged, loyal, and willing to support the things she promotes. She streams on Twitch, sells custom videos on Cameo, maintains her successful OnlyFans, drops new Shaitan collections regularly, attends exclusive fashion events, and generally lives as a multi-hyphenate creative entrepreneur who has successfully monetized her notoriety while slowly changing the conversation around who she is and what she represents. More importantly than the financial success, Mia has used her platform to make a tangible difference in causes she cares about. She's raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for Lebanese relief efforts following the Beirut explosion and various crises affecting her home country. She's amplified voices in organizations working for women's rights and sex workers' protections. She's spoken at events and in interviews about mental health, exploitation, and the importance of informed consent, and she's become an unofficial spokesperson for the millions of people who make mistakes in their youth and spend the rest of their lives trying to move beyond them while society refuses to let them forget. She's also been fearlessly outspoken on political issues even when it costs her, using her platform to criticize U.S. foreign policy, stand up for Palestinian rights, call out corruption in Lebanon and other Middle Eastern countries, and advocate for progressive causes. Accepting that controversy comes with the territory and that staying silent on issues of justice would be a betrayal of the platform she's built. And through all of this activism and advocacy, she's modeled a kind of resilience and redemption that resonates with people who feel like they've been judged, dismissed, or defined by their worst moments, showing them that it's possible to reclaim your narrative even when the internet has already written your story. Looking at Mia's present life in 2025, we see someone who has achieved a delicate balance between acknowledging her past without being imprisoned by it. She doesn't hide from the adult industry chapter of her life, but she also doesn't let it be the only thing people know about her. And she's created multiple revenue streams and business ventures that give her financial security and creative fulfillment beyond her OnlyFans income, ensuring that she's building something sustainable that can evolve as she ages and her priorities shift. She continues to be active in fashion, with rumors of new brand collaborations and campaign opportunities constantly circulating, and Shaitan keeps expanding its product lines and building a devoted customer base that appreciates Mia's aesthetic and the brand's message of self-expression and empowerment. She remains deeply connected to sports, particularly hockey and football, and there are ongoing discussions about expanding her sports commentary work, possibly hosting new shows or podcasts that capitalize on her genuine passion and knowledge. She's also exploring opportunities in mainstream entertainment, with cameo appearances like her role in the Hulu series Rami in 2020 and the Bella Poarch music video showing that Hollywood is slowly warming to the idea that she could have an acting career if she pursues it. And through it all, she maintains her massive social media presence, posting regularly about her life, her opinions, her travels, her outfits, her causes, creating a parasocial relationship with millions of followers who feel like they know her personally and have followed her journey from its darkest moments to its current success. And this audience is her greatest asset because they're invested not just in her content but in her story, in seeing her win despite everything that was supposed to break her. But even with all this success, Mia still grapples with the fundamental unfairness of her situation. She spent 3 months in the adult industry a decade ago and it will define her forever, appearing in every article, every introduction, every conversation about her no matter what else she accomplishes. And she knows that men who spent years in the industry can transition into mainstream careers with far less stigma and judgment than she faces for 3 months of work, and she understands that. The hijab scene, which she was pressured into doing despite her explicit concerns, will be discussed and debated long after she's gone, used as evidence of her poor judgment or exploitation depending on the audience, and the death threats, while less frequent now, have never completely stopped, reminding her that there are people in the world who believe she deserves to die for decisions she made as a confused, insecure 21-year-old seeking validation. She's spoken openly about how this permanent association affects her mental health, how therapy remains essential, how she has to actively work against the depression and anxiety that threaten to overwhelm her when she reads comments calling her a disgrace or claiming she can never be redeemed, and the fact that she's managed to not just survive but thrive under this level of scrutiny and judgment speaks to an inner strength that many people severely underestimate. She didn't have the luxury of wealthy parents or industry connections to fall back on. She built everything from scratch after being abandoned by her family and condemned by her culture, and the business empire and media presence she's created represent a level of resilience and determination that deserves recognition beyond the sensational headlines. As we look toward Mia Khalifa's future, the possibilities are both exciting and uncertain. She's expressed interest in continuing to expand Shaitan, potentially moving beyond jewelry and bodywear into fragrance, home goods, and other lifestyle categories that allow her to build a sustainable brand that could outlast her personal fame. She's talked about wanting to do more advocacy work, potentially starting a foundation or non-profit focused on supporting women who want to leave the adult industry, providing them with resources, legal support, and alternative career paths that she had to figure out on her own. She's interested in expanding her presence in mainstream entertainment, possibly pursuing acting roles that would challenge perceptions of who she is and what she's capable of, proving that she has talent beyond her internet persona. She's committed to continuing her sports commentary work, leveraging her genuine passion and knowledge to create content that appeals to both hardcore sports fans and casual viewers who enjoy her personality and perspective, and she's determined to keep using her platform for political and social activism, speaking out on issues affecting the Middle East, women's rights, mental health awareness, and other causes that matter to her regardless of the professional consequences, because at this point in her life, authenticity matters more than universal approval. But perhaps most importantly for Mia's future, she's working on making peace with her past, not accepting that it defines her, but acknowledging that it happened, that it shaped her in both damaging and surprisingly constructive ways, and that the person she is now couldn't exist without those painful experiences that taught her about exploitation, resilience, mental health, the cruelty and beauty of internet fame, and the importance of controlling your own narrative. She's talked about writing a memoir or participating in a documentary that tells her full story, not just the salacious headlines but the human reality of what it's like to become globally famous for the wrong reasons at 21 and spend the next decade trying to reclaim your identity. She's interested in using her business acumen to mentor other influencers and entrepreneurs, particularly women, sharing the hard-won lessons she's learned about contracts, branding, mental health, and building sustainable income streams in the unpredictable world of social media. And she's focused on finding personal happiness and stability in her relationships, learning to trust again despite multiple failed marriages and the constant challenge of figuring out who's interested in Mia the person versus Mia Khalifa the brand, and building a life that feels authentic and fulfilling even if it doesn't look traditional or conventional by society's standards. The legacy Mia Khalifa will leave behind is still being written, but certain themes are already clear. She'll be remembered as a cautionary tale about the adult industry's exploitation of young women, about how companies profit while performers bear the consequences, about contracts that favor corporations over individuals, and about the permanent nature of internet content in an age where youthful mistakes can haunt you forever. She'll be discussed in conversations about digital rights and whether people should have the ability to remove content they created years ago, especially when that content was produced under pressure or without full understanding of the long-term implications. She'll be cited in debates about sex work, whether it can ever be truly empowering or whether the power imbalance makes exploitation inevitable, and whether society's condemnation of performers versus consumers reveals a deep hypocrisy. She'll be studied as a case of successful personal branding and narrative reclamation, how someone can take the worst thing that ever happened to them and transform it into a platform for business, activism, and connection. And she'll be remembered as a complex, flawed, resilient human being who made mistakes, paid a devastating price, refused to be destroyed by judgment and shame, and built something meaningful from the rubble of her reputation, creating a life of purpose, influence, and financial success that very few people thought possible when she left the adult industry broken in 2015. When we step back and look at the entirety of Mia Khalifa's journey, what emerges is not the one-dimensional figure that headlines suggest but a deeply human story of transformation. A lonely immigrant child who never felt like she belonged, a young woman with severe body image issues who sought validation in all the wrong places, a naive 21-year-old who made a catastrophic decision that would define her entire adult life, a survivor of death threats and family abandonment who somehow found the strength to keep living when suicide must have seemed like the easier option, a businesswoman who leveraged her notoriety into multiple income streams and genuine entrepreneurial success, an activist who speaks out even when silence would be more profitable, a fashion figure who earned her place at the table through authenticity and style rather than traditional credentials, and a perpetually evolving person who refuses to be reduced to a single chapter of her life no matter how many people insist that's all she'll ever be. And while reasonable people can disagree about her choices, her methods, or her message, What cannot be denied is that Mia Khalifa survived something that would have destroyed most people, and not only survived but found ways to thrive, to build, to advocate, and to create meaning from pain. There's something profoundly American about her story too, the immigrant narrative twisted into a cautionary tale about the dark side of fame and the internet's permanent memory, but also about second chances, reinvention, and the possibility that you can overcome society's harshest judgments if you're willing to fight for yourself when nobody else will. And in a culture that loves comeback stories but rarely extends grace to women, especially women who worked in adult entertainment, Mia Khalifa's continued relevance and success represents a small but significant shift in how we think about redemption, judgment, and who deserves a second chance to define themselves. So now, as we close this chapter of Mia's story, knowing it's still being written, that new challenges and opportunities await her, that public opinion will continue to shift and debate and judge, we're left with a fundamental question about how we treat people who make mistakes, especially public mistakes that live forever on the internet, and whether we believe in the possibility of growth, change, and redemption, or whether we prefer to keep people trapped in their worst moments because it's easier, more satisfying, more entertaining to watch someone suffer than to acknowledge their humanity and complexity. And Mia Khalifa, whether you admire her or criticize her, whether you follow her journey or wish you'd never heard her name, has become an unlikely symbol of resilience in an age that demands perfection while gleefully documenting every failure. A reminder that the person behind the headlines is always more complicated than the story we tell ourselves about them, and that sometimes the greatest act of rebellion is simply refusing to disappear when the world decides you should. I want to hear from you now, because this story doesn't end with what I think. What's your honest take on Mia Khalifa's journey? Do you believe she was exploited, or did she make her own choices and should own them? Can someone truly move past their history when the internet never forgets, or is she setting an example of what reclaiming your narrative looks like in the digital age? Do you respect her activism and business ventures, or do you think her past will always overshadow anything else she tries to accomplish? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and let's have a real conversation about judgment, redemption, and what we owe people who made mistakes before they fully understood the consequences. And if this story moved you, challenged you, or made you see Mia Khalifa as a human being rather than a headline, do me a favor, hit that like button, because these deep dives take serious time and research, and your support helps me keep bringing you the untold stories behind the people who shaped our culture, for better or worse. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Star's Tale and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started. There are so many more stories to tell, so many more lives to explore, and I promise you, nothing is ever quite what it seems when you dig beneath the surface. This is Star's Tale, where every story matters, every voice deserves to be heard, and every person is more than their worst day. I'll see you in the next one.